JetBlue is among the biggest airlines in the United States, flying 40 million passengers to over 100 destinations every year. In February of 2000, they took their first ever flight. It was from New York to Florida, making them the newest of all the country's major airlines. Every one that is bigger than them has roots going back decades earlier, and during that comparatively short time, JetBlue has arguably disrupted the industry. They're characterized by their unique balance of low cost and customer satisfaction, to a point where a study at MIT concluded that when JetBlue enters a new market, other airlines start lowering their prices to compete with them. It has been called the JetBlue effect. Overall, I would consider this one of the biggest and fastest success stories in aviation history. They flew 1 million customers within the first year, made a profit after only 2 years, had a successful initial public stock offering within 3 years, and exceeded $1 billion in sales after only 5 years. I mean, in the period following 9/11, air travel was way down, and they were one of the few airlines that was managing to do really well. However, in the mid-2000s, things took a negative turn. Though they did continue growing, they started reporting losses, their debt grew to over $3 billion, and their stock price was plummeting. If you had invested $100 in JetBlue shortly after their IPO in 2002, you would have had less than $50 remaining after 5 years, which is significantly lower than the return from the overall market and from other airlines. Nothing official, but at the time, there were rumors circulating among employees that Delta may try to take advantage of that low point and buy the company, potentially meaning the end of JetBlue. Maybe I'm getting carried away here because that never happened. JetBlue was able to make a respectable recovery and grow much larger than they had ever been before. There is so much to talk about here that I think is all fascinating, so in this video, I want to cover the rise, fall, and rise again of JetBlue. This is a company that looked promising from the very beginning, and a lot of that can be attributed to David Neeleman, a Mormon who was born in Brazil, grew up in Utah, and happens to be the founder, initial CEO, and easily the name that is most associated with JetBlue. In the 1970s, a woman named June Morris started a travel agency that in the 1980s was transformed into a low-cost airline with the help of David Neeleman. Probably the most significant thing about Morris Air is that they were the originators of ticketless reservations. Before that, airline tickets included multiple papers with carbon copies, and it was a whole thing. But Morris Air created a system where it was all done over the internet or the phone. It saved money on paper, postage, processing, and turned out to be a feature that other airlines wanted to incorporate into their operations, like Southwest, for example. In 1993, while undergoing treatment for a life-threatening illness, June Morris decided to sell the company to Southwest for $130 million. I do want to mention that she did recover from the illness and ended up living until the age of 90, but the company was sold in a deal where David Neeleman earned an estimated $20 million and signed a non-compete clause saying he wouldn't work for another US airline for the next 5 years. Over that time, he was surprisingly productive. He helped establish WestJet Airlines in Canada and Open Skies reservation system in the US. He spent 4 years making these ticketless reservation systems and selling them to other airlines before ultimately selling the company to HP. Once that non-compete clause was over, he set out to start a new airline that became known as JetBlue. As I said before, it was almost instantly successful, so let me try to identify some of the biggest reasons behind that initial growth and success. Starting off with the leadership. At around 40 years old, David Neeleman had already accomplished so much in the aviation industry that investors trusted him with $130 million to start his new airline. That, by the way, was an unprecedented amount, more than any other similar startup had ever raised before. He used the money to hire experienced leadership from competing airlines, most notably John Owen, who had spent 14 years as treasurer over at Southwest. He was an important piece because a lot of JetBlue's strategy was modeled after Southwest. See, they were known for flying only Boeing 737 airplanes. Using a single type of plane just simplifies things, and cuts costs, because maintenance and training and other things are the same for all of them. JetBlue used some of that $130 million, along with John Owen's experience buying airplanes, to form a deal with Airbus, where they bought a fleet of their A320 airplanes, which are comparable to the Boeing 737. So right from the beginning, starting out, they had all these brand new, identical, attractive, and efficient planes that help lower costs and attract passengers. They flew only A320s for the first 5 years or so, until they started using Embraer 190s as well. They were also successful because of their low ticket prices, averaging around $100 early on, which even at the time was far more reasonable than most other airlines, and they were able to make that happen by keeping their costs down. Using that ticketless reservation system saved a lot of money on paper and processing and everything else. Plus, way more than other airlines, people were booking their flights directly with JetBlue over the internet, as opposed to travel agents that received commissions. A lot of their employees were working from home, cutting down on overhead costs, not to mention their fleet of identical aircraft and other measures that they took from Southwest, like flying point to point on many flights instead of going through a hub. JetBlue also gained popularity by using JFK Airport in New York as their base. See, Southwest wanted to actively avoid busy airports like JFK or the one in Boston because they wanted to get all their flights through quickly, and that left JetBlue open to large populations of potential customers in search of low-cost flights. They had been able to keep things moving by strategically offering most of their flights outside of the congested hours of 3 to 8 p.m. and have been able to attract millions of customers from throughout the area. Probably the single greatest reason behind their success is customer satisfaction. The big phrase that David Neeleman was saying even before that first flight was that JetBlue would bring humanity back to air travel. He said that because in 2000, the public was getting upset with air travel. The Department of Transportation was receiving more and more complaints about overbookings and flight delays and mishandled baggage, so JetBlue figured that they could stand out from the others by offering a positive experience for a reasonable price that became known as the JetBlue Experience. I'm talking about leather seats, free snacks, more space, live satellite TV. That was a huge deal back in the early 2000s.
Hey, it's me again, the guy who can't stop, won't stop on a comfy leather seat with lots of leg room and free direct TV, not to mention all the snacks I can eat, and boy, I can eat a lot of snacks. Let's hear it for the snacks.
David Neeleman himself would even show up on the flight serving snacks as a way to stay in touch with the customers and what they want from their experience. He has even said that JetBlue is a customer service company that happens to fly airplanes. I'm not going to go through everything here, but flying on JetBlue became a noticeably different experience. People would tell their friends about it, and they developed this great reputation. Alright, that is how JetBlue became one of the fastest growing, well-liked airlines, but as I showed before, they quickly ran into trouble. By 2005, things were becoming more competitive. The industry was consolidating with large airlines coming together, while others were filing for bankruptcy. You might think that those bankruptcies would make things easier for JetBlue, but restructuring debt can actually lead to more freedom and lower costs overall. It mostly just helped those competitors. Also, the price that JetBlue was paying for fuel was getting out of hand, way higher than it ever was before, and they tried to combat that by removing a row of seats from all of their A320 planes. That way they would save fuel by carrying fewer people and therefore less weight, and as a bonus, it gave the people in the remaining seats some extra leg room. But by far, the most publicized part of this downfall occurred in February of 2007. Terrible timing, because they were already trying to execute this return to profitability plan, and this did not help the situation. On Valentine's Day, there was a big ice storm in New York. The forecast said that it was going to clear up, so JetBlue decided to continue as usual loading up planes for takeoff, but the storm did not clear up as they expected. FAA regulations prevented them from taking off in those conditions. The wheels froze to the ground, and passengers in 9 airplanes were forced to sit there and wait for 6 to 10 hours. A frightening looking, uncomfortable situation that JetBlue probably could have prevented, but maybe even worse was their inability to recover their schedule. Over the next week, they canceled 1,200 flights, affecting 131,000 customers. The reason for all these cancellations stems back to their low cost structure and all of this rapid growth that they had been doing before. Their systems weren't equipped to handle such a big problem. They couldn't communicate effectively with their pilots and flight attendants to get them in the proper places. Their reservation system couldn't handle all the people trying to rebook their flights. It was a disastrous combination of poor decisions, being ill-prepared, and just bad luck. In the end, it cost JetBlue an estimated $30 million, but the bigger cost was the damage that it had done to their reputation. reputation. Remember, this is a company that was essentially built on their reputation. Seemingly, nobody ever had anything bad to say about them before this, and now, here, they were being criticized and made fun of all over the place. They took it very seriously, because it can be hard to come back from something like that. David Neeleman said that he was humiliated and mortified by what happened, and instantly went on all the talk shows and news channels to explain what happened and to issue an apology. JetBlue gave full refunds and flight vouchers to the people who were stuck on a plane for more than 3 hours, and went so far as to publish a customer bill of rights that promised varying degrees of compensation to anyone who experienced cancellations or delays. They even hired an external team to help them identify operational weaknesses so that they can improve upon them and prevent something like this from ever happening again. A few months later, the board of directors asked David Neeleman to resign from his CEO position. He agreed to leave, but man, that's gotta be hard, to essentially be fired from running the company that you had built. Over time, they were able to regain the public's trust and respect, returning to consistent profitability by 2009, even exceeding $1 billion in profits in 2017. By that year, by the way, they had also grown their sales to above $7 billion and paid off their debt down to $1.2 billion. The following year, they did run into more issues involving fuel prices and hurricanes, and then obviously the pandemic hurt them in 2020. Things have been far from perfect for JetBlue, but nothing as uniquely severe has impacted them, and their reputation appears to almost be fully recovered. Their continued focus on the customer has earned them multiple awards from places like J.D. Power and Associates, and typically high rankings from the American Customer Satisfaction Index. So there you have it, the unusual rise, fall, and rise again of one of the country's biggest, most successful airlines, JetBlue. Let me know in the comments, what do you think about JetBlue? Do you prefer them over the competing airlines, or is there something that makes you stay away from them? I guess what I'm asking is, if you have ever flown with JetBlue, how do you rate the JetBlue experience? Is it pretty good for the price, or does it fail to live up to its reputation? I find this entire thing to be a cautionary yet inspirational tale that I think is valuable to talk about, so any other thoughts you have about JetBlue, leave them in the comments. I'd like to hear what you have to say.
That's why I fly JetBlue, because they don't stop. They're non-stop to cities I do business with, like Chicago, LA, Newark, DC, Baltimore, San Fran, Vegas, Charlotte, Raleigh.
Thank you for watching.